this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin. Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. I don't know that anyone out there would actually admit to being spoiled when they were a child. You like to think that you weren't spoiled. And I was not spoiled by my mother. However, the one person in my life that did spoil me was my grandmother. Her name's Pearl, by the way. If you haven't read my memoir, I talk about her a lot. And of course, still to this day, I think that she was an angel on earth. And I hate to tie this back to materialism, but grandmothers are interesting creatures, to say the least. And the reason they are is that if they have a grandchild that they dote upon, and I was the only one at that time, you knew that there was always a trip to the toy store in your future. And for me, the toy store, and I'm really going back in time here, the toy store that we always went to was T, G, and Y. Many people have never heard that name before. There was also Ben Franklin. There were several of them. These places don't exist anymore. But those trips would consistently end in me reaping the benefit of being spoiled, because my grandmother would buy me anything that I'd want off of those shelves. And she didn't have a lot of money. But my favorite toy to get was any new toy pistol that they had. And it could be one of those Star Trek pistols that shoots a little plastic disc. I always dig those. I love those things. You could stack them inside. Look that up if you've never seen it. Of course, the old fallback of the cat pistol was always lovely. And they did have a semblance back then of these guns that would kind of shoot these padded darts, not quite as sophisticated as the ones today, but I always loved those pistols. But the thing about it is, even as a small child, I could feel the weight of it. It didn't feel like the guns that my grandfather had. Heavy metal. They had substance to them. Today, though, I'm going to talk about another gun. I'm going to talk about a gun that is essentially made from a type of plastic, a polymer, actually. And that weapon, acquired allegedly by one individual and held in that individual's hand and used to assassinate an individual on the streets of Manhattan, has created, let's say, havoc around the nation for these past few days. We're going to talk about the assassination in the early morning hours of CEO Brian Thompson and the alleged perpetrator, Luigi Mangione. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Brother Dave, look, we will catch cases. I'm talking to you like I'm talking to a fellow investigator. We used to say all the time, we caught a case. Yeah. So, but for us in the world that we inhabit, we do catch cases that, people use terms zeitgeist and things like that. Right. This is not a zeitgeist thing. It's just whatever's kind of pulsing through the veins of the media at any moment in time. But there are those cases that day after day after day, we're going to cover them. And when I say we, I mean you to a greater extent than I, because you are Nancy Grace's right-hand man. You're having to put all of this stuff together. I just want to ask, first off, I want to check, are you okay? Are you all right? Do you
It
need
has
a
been,
pillow? Do you need a
it's funny.
pillow?
It's been an exhausting week, in that you're right. We have covered it, but I was, Luigi Mangione is a 26-year-old rich kid. And when you mentioned spoiled, and I thought, I know how Joe was spoiled. It was with love and a granny. It wasn't spoiled like this guy was spoiled. Although he was spoiled with love and a granny too. There was a lot of love in the Mangione household, but there was also a lot of money. But his wealth and some of the things that he has said in his manifesto lead you to believe that he's something other than what he is. And I don't know if he is. I don't know. We'll find out. But yes, I am pretty exhausted with this story, and rightly so. How many of us today have had issues with healthcare insurance ever since the government got involved? Quick raise your hands. Everybody has. Everybody's premiums have tripled. Everybody's copay has tripled. It's ridiculous what happens when the government gets involved. And that's all I'm going to say about politics from here on out, except to say this. Luigi Mangione was not a customer. He was not insured by United Healthcare. The CEO of United Healthcare was Brian Thompson. He'd been with the company for over 20 years. Brian Thompson had worked his way up in the company, and he was a very wealthy CEO, made a good annual salary, had great annual bonuses. And you know what? There might have been some stock shenanigans that went on. Don't know. I mean, I know what I read in Forbes, and I know what I've read since, but that had nothing to do with what Luigi Mangione did. Still got to figure this out. But the one thing that we do know so far, Luigi Mangione grew up in a very wealthy family. It's a great, actually, in this day and age where we talk about immigrants in our country, a lot of problems we have politically are illegal immigration. Whenever I look at these great stories of immigrants who did it the right way, this is one of those stories. Luigi Mangione's grandfather, his name's Nick. Nick Mangione was born here. His parents immigrated from Italy, and Nick Mangione grew up dirt poor. And he made something of himself in real estate investment. He ended up buying resorts and golf clubs and anything you can imagine, became a very wealthy man, and that extended to his family. And now here's Luigi, a third-generation American, and he goes to the private Gilman School in Baltimore, $40,000 a year to go to school there instead of a public school. He then goes to the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League school. By the way, not an idiot. The guy was valedictorian at Gilman, and then at UPenn, he has 2 degrees there. One is in engineering. He's not an idiot.
I think, actually, there's been a little confusion. When I read, you know how when you read, if you look at individuals that have been degreed, and, those of us in academia, you always have to include your credentials.
Right.
I've always said that there's a direct correlation between the number of letters that you have after your name and the bleeding of numbers off of your IQ. Most of the time, some of the smartest people I know don't have college degrees. But with his, what I read was when you look at his degree, one of the ways it was labeled was a BSE,
right,
which generally stands for Bachelor of Science in Engineering, and an MSE, which is a Master of Science in Engineering, which means that, and I think that his area of study was computer science. So computational engineering, or whatever they call it, computer engineering, or whatever it is. But he did have apparently a fascination with like AI. Yeah. And, kind of creating these alternative universes. And how old was he? He's like 26.
26.
He's 26, and he's still playing with cartoon characters on his computer.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
I saw that one comment, that was made out there where he's creating these, and I guess that's one of the things that you do in AI. And, no offense to people out there that are creating cartoon characters. I guess if I could draw Bugs Bunny, I would do that all the time. But it's just, it's kind of an interesting mix, in media and in academia. In a lot of industries, there's a buzzword out there that you use regularly. You may have heard it before, Dave. They say we're going to silo things now. And what that means is that you're taken and you were set apart and you're siloed. Dude, this dude led a siloed life. He siloed on that campus at Penn. Okay, he was siloed when he was at the Gilman School. I just like the way that rolls off the tongue, right? Gilman School, It's probably it's preceded by the word the, the Gilman School. and then Penn, he siloed there. And, I don't want to go too far down this path, but, dude, you've got quite an exquisite education. But Dave, correct me if I'm wrong. You boys living in paradise part-time, right? I mean, he's gone down this path where he's living. You had mentioned it the other day. It was a term I'd never heard before.
Well, it's like a hippie Hawaii commune for those who want to surf and look at the sun and talk about books. It was a rest area for people who are in their 20s. Okay, it's a dorm room for people who have graduated college but don't actually have to move on with life and earn a living. And that's what he had been doing. He'd been in Hawaii. But before we get too far down the road on Luigi Mangione, he did go to Hawaii, but he hurt his back somewhere along the way, a pinched nerve, problem in his lower back, rather, not his neck, his lumbar. And he had surgery on his back.
Yeah.
And that happened. And things went downhill for him after the surgery. It didn't correct his pain issues. He ended up posting a picture on X or Instagram of his X-ray that showed the bolts or the screws in his neck or back, or wherever it was. It wasn't his lower back, right? His lumbar.
Yeah, it looked like his sacrum, the lower back. Yeah.
And so Joe and I both know what back issues can do to you.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I think that you and I have that in common, don't we, Dave?
And watching this guy, and I'm thinking it can be really, really bad. And so while a lot of people immediately hop off of that subject, it's like, I think it's important to note that I don't know the level of his chronic pain. I don't know what medication he's been taking. I don't know, but I will tell you, you take the wrong medications and the right to take care of a problem, and you do start thinking wrong and weird. And if you have the intelligence and the money, a lot of bad things can happen. This guy had gone so off grid. Luigi Mangione's mother, she reported him missing in San Francisco, November the 18th. He had not been in communication with any family, friends, or anybody since June. They were looking for him. And less than 10 days before he shows up in New York City, his mother registers a missing persons thing with police in San Francisco. So that gives you an idea of this guy and his family. They were not disconnected, but they didn't have the kind of contact one would think. I mean, if you don't know where your son is, and by the way, they thought he was working for True Car in San Francisco. And his mother thought that's why she reported him missing in San Francisco. And it was only when she got there and they called True Car to find out about this guy. Hey, he's been coming to work. And I'm like, no, he hadn't been here since 2023. She didn't even know that he didn't work there anymore. And so there was a disconnect here with him, his family, and his friends. And you said siloed, meaning being by himself and functioning alone. He's been doing a lot of that until he showed up at 6:44 in the morning and pulled out a gun printed on a 3D printer. Do you think he did that gun, Joe? Do you think he printed that?
I don't know. There's still a lot of speculation right now, and I trying to keep up with this. First off, to own a 3D printer that is at this level, I think maybe maybe that's not accurate, but in order to facilitate a functional weapon, and we can go into this, and I will, I promise, but you would, it's something that would stand out. You would have to have a place where you could facilitate this and hang on to it and, create this. And many times when you print these things off, it's, I've heard at least that sometimes the first time is not the charm. You have to work at this to get it right, in order to get this thing right. Because if you have what's referred to as the lower receiver, which in this case, if folks at home will just if you think about gripping a pistol, okay, now this is on the body frame of a Glock, okay, which is by nature, it's the first polymer weapon that was ever introduced. All right. It's famous for that. All right. It's an Austrian-made weapon. They're carried all over the world. Law enforcement agencies all over the place carry them. Certain military groups carry them. But it was like the first polymer weapon, and there was a big stink over it. I remember years ago. Well, if these people are going to be running around with these Glocks and they'll make it through metal detectors, the whole weapon is not polymer. All right. And that's where it comes in with him, because he has created, apparently, allegedly, the lower receiver, which is the actual grip. Okay. And then the body where the trigger housing is. You have to go and still purchase aftermarket individual elements of this weapon that would fit for the type of weapon. And I'm not saying that this is what it is, but let's just take, for instance, a Glock 17. Glock 17 is an older Glock, been around for a long, long time, and it's chambered in a 9mm, and we do know that it is a 9mm. And so if you take that, you would have to go out and buy the metallic slide that goes on the top where the guts of the weapon are, where the charging hand. Well, that's my Army self-talking. That's from back in the day with the M16s. But the slide itself, which you would use to charge the weapon in order to ram that round into the chamber. And then you have to have the trigger mechanism too. That's bought separately. And you have to have the barrel that's bought separately. The problem with these weapons for law enforcement is that when you buy these things, they don't have serial numbers on them. None of them. None of them. And that's the rub. And they're not illegal to possess. So if you're trying to track a weapon that may have been used in an offense, okay, you're not going to be able to trace it through a serial number necessarily, because there are no serial numbers. All right. Because each one of these components is ordered and purchased separately. I'm thinking that in the days and the weeks to come, we're going to find out more. But I think that one of the big tells here, Dave, is that, and one of the more interesting parts to this is that not only did he have a ghost gun, as they say, he also had a suppressor as well that had been 3D modeled and created. And that's the rub. He knew that he could go out in the early morning hours when New York, if you've ever been there at that time of day when it's just starting to wake up, and I've walked down the streets before, and the sun hasn't quite made it up yet. You can see a lot of vendors that are driving around, deliveries, those sorts of things. You can hear horns honking in the distance, but you don't hear screaming yet and shouting. The city is still asleep, but he had this suppressed weapon and he fired it, and apparently it didn't draw much attention. And of course, that may have been his goal all along.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey, Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn sensational.
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Dave, I don't know if you remember this. You're going to remember when I say it. You and I have covered a couple of assassins on this on body bags. Now there's some out there that are in fact murderers that we have covered. I guess you could technically call them assassins. And most of the time when you hear assassin or assassination, it's generally plugged into people like John Wilkes Booth or Lee Harvey Oswald or Brutus with Julius Caesar, one of my favorite episodes. Again, I'm partial relative to Julius Caesar's autopsy. But Dave, they have used the term over and over again, assassin, in this case. And yeah, I guess you could say that this is an assassination. However, there are murders that take place every day that are actually assassinations, I guess. So I think, and this is more rhetorical, I sit here and I think, well, what delineates between an assassination and a murder? One of the big problems with JFK case is that they treated it like it was not a murder. They treated it as if it was an assassination. And of course, they took their eye off the ball with that case. I'm hoping that's not going to be the case here, that you've classified it in some other way, because the word assassination keeps coming up. Well, this is a murder. It's a cold-blooded murder.
I think I have to add myself to the part of that, because I heard it mentioned as an assassination, because the reason is because the person who was murdered was the CEO of a company that handles insurance for 49% of the American population. So this is the CEO of a very powerful company that impacts almost half of our lives. So he is, in that regard, somebody that would not be just murdered, but he was taken out for a reason. It was like Luigi Mangione was not just doing it for himself. He was doing it for all of mankind or whatever. I'm not saying that was what he was thinking. I'm saying that's kind of how the way it's been positioned. And when you look at some of the tracking that's taking place on social media, there are people that are already talking about jury nullification.
Yeah.
And that is, it's just beyond the pale. The bottom line is Luigi Mangione is accused of planning the murder of an individual, a father. Brian Thompson, married father of two. Now, he and his wife, Paulette, had been married for 2 decades. They met in college. They both had similar backgrounds. She has been her own career working with physical adjustments of individuals and things like that. She's a very educated woman, very polished. They have 2 teenage sons, and they were going through a separation. They had separated in Minnesota where they lived. The movement of houses was not that great. Brian Thompson was still living close enough to be active in his children, again, they're teenage boys, but to be active in their daily life. But he was in New York for a business meeting. It's the time of year where you're sharing the financials for your company. Right. He was not staying at the hotel that was hosting the conference. He was actually staying at another one and was walking into that hotel just before 7 a.m. to get ready for the conference. Now, Luigi Mangione knew what the schedule was, and he had to have known that Brian Thompson was going to be getting there earlier than the 8 a.m. start of the conference. I think pretty much anybody that follows along a person's activities would know they're not going to show up right at the time to walk through the door and go on stage. But to be there that
they're
close,
not, because I have to go to these conferences. If you've never been to one of these things,
you sound disgusted when you say it.
I find it tedious sometimes. Mm-hmm. CrimeCon's one thing because there's like an energy there.
Yeah, it's fun.
But when you go to anything that's directly related to like a job that you have, like academic conferences, there's old friends that you want to see, but it's like, okay, what's the next session going to be? And you go to a series of sessions, and but this is kind of a siloed event where this is for this company. So it's not just a matter of him being there to be prepped to speak, which I think he was one of the featured speakers as well. He should have been.
He was.
But there's also a bit of politicking that's going to go on as well. Where you get all the division heads, you're sitting around, you're drinking coffee, you're eating Danish or whatever it is. Maybe he's going to go in there and eat breakfast. I have no idea. Yeah. And then, he's going to hit the schedule. And of course, before you do that, you always go in, and I know you've seen this, Dave, you go in because you've had to prep people for this. You go into a big room and you want to make sure your AV is going to work. You're going to test everything, all those sorts of things. And maybe that was part of it. Maybe he's just going to walk around with a mic in his hand. I have no idea. But, you're there for a reason. And if you're the boss, you damn well better be visible and be at every single thing, because there's stockholders there. They want to know that you have a presence and that you're actually invested. And so I think that anybody that was looking to do harm to him, Dave, they may have an awareness of that. They may know that, look, if I'm going to destroy this man, he's going to have to be here. There's a guarantee that his presence will be here, and it really made me think about, when Lennon was killed, and, his assassin, they used the term assassin with Lennon, remember? Yeah. He, the infamous photograph of him actually handing over the album for him to sign, and then he's back there. Yeah, I mean, he's back there again. So he's kind of casing the joint, if you will, and shows up prepped. He shows up prepped to the extent that he had a weapon. But, dude, allegedly, Mangione, he didn't just show up with a weapon, man. I mean, he's got everything that he needs at this point in time. There was some question if he had layered clothing in order to change clothing, and I've seen this in cases before, particularly in the drug world, where you will have people that are out to kill somebody and they will layer clothing on. And as they're fleeing, they'll begin to strip clothing off and they're throwing it away as they're doing it. You see guys that would have jeans on and they would strip out and they'd have sweatpants on underneath. They'd have a bright colored jacket, because if you can say that guy's got an orange, I saw him, he had an orange jacket on. He rips it off and he's got like a blue sweatshirt on underneath it. He doesn't look anything like that. So at first I'm thinking, well, that's what's going on. And he's got this, they made a big deal out of this backpack that he had as well. And so there's been a lot of thought that has gone into this, Dave.
Well, what we do know is that Luigi Mangione had gone by, picked up a bottle of water, a cup of coffee, a nutrition bar of some kind, and had a cell phone on him because they found remnants of all of these in an alleyway near where he was going to take the shot. Now, as Brian Thompson is walking into the hotel, I made the mistake of saying he was killed in broad daylight. And the reason I said broad daylight is while the sun wasn't up, it was active, busy just before 7 a.m. That's daytime to me. And he was shot in front of people. And I actually made the comment to somebody, they're showing this. I had never actually seen what we saw when it came to the murder of Brian Thompson, where
shocking. It was shocking to me because and now they've pulled back on that. Yes. The media has, because the first day afterwards, they played the whole thing.
Yes.
And you can see this man stumble.
And my first thing was, I got to get Joe to tell me what happened, because this is the first time we're not getting the blurred image. We actually see him stumble, as you mentioned. He got shot twice, but when you see it in real time, Joe, it happened bam, bam, fast. He's gone. He's falling down and the gun is this way, and people, there were so many things said right away, eyewitness stuff. We had the silencer idea, then we had the veterinary gun idea, and then came back to the silencer after he was found. But the bottom line is that Luigi Mangione was lying in wait for Brian Thompson. We've had the lying in wait story many times. With Jared Brightingham comes to mind, where they laid the tire in the road. And in this case, he knew where Brian Thompson was coming from and knew where he was going to go in.
There's actually another weapon that was involved in this too. There were all kinds of people that were out there speculating on the fact that this was a World War II era special stamped metal weapon. I think the Brits had made it what was it called? Anyway, I can come back to that. But anyway, it works in the same fashion, or it works in the same fashion as the vet gun did. But now they're saying it's not like the vet gun, because that thing, you have to actuate the slide on it, and you can see him clearing the weapon. And with the vet gun, it's got like a rolling bolt in it where you have to literally spin. There's a little knob on the back of this thing where you have to spin it around. Well, that vet gun evolved from that original suppressed weapon, and that thing was all one piece that they had made, and they were easy to make. They were cheap to make. It was a suppressed weapon. By the way, just so that everybody's listening, I don't like the word silencer, because silencer implies that things are silent, and there is no such thing as silencio when it comes to a weapon. That's why I stick with suppressor, because it knocks down the sound, but you'll never get it like how many times, Dave, do you remember when we were kids, and they would always have these in the 60s, remember? Somebody would, put a suppressor on a weapon, and you'd hear that little pink sound like that of the weapon. Listen, if you've got a suppressed 9mm, it's not going to go pink like that. It'll have a more robust sound than that. Okay. It's not going to knock down the sound to that point, but it does a couple of interesting things though, when anytime you introduce a suppressor into a weapon, first off, it can cause, you can actually see the action of the weapon is affected. And what I mean by that, when the weapon is discharged, it can compromise the weapon's ability, because you have a reduction in the power of the weapon because of the suppressor to get the weapon to cycle. So you might have to clear it multiple times. Do you see how smooth he was with that, by the way? I think he was practiced. Now, I'm not saying he's a professional gunner here. All right. I'm not saying that. But he knew, I think he probably understood the limitations of that weapon, because, and he transitioned. One of the things that you can tell when you go to I'm not a good shot, and I've been having to fire weapons since I was a kid. And certainly qualifying with weapons, I was always a bag of nerves. I was never good at it. My eyesight is horrible. So if I just got like in the Army, I think I got like a marksman. I was fine with that. I never had a desire to be an expert at anything. I was an intel guy. So it's like I could shoot in the general. Give me a shotgun, guys. So it was like I had no desire. I had to qualify my weapon, because at the ME's office and in the coroner's office in New Orleans, we all carried weapons. You had to go to qualification. Twice a year. I was always nervous. And so, but when you go to a range and you see somebody that is very proficient, they practice with a weapon, there's a silky smoothness to it, and they never get rattled. And when you watch him shoot, one of the big things is when you're talking about acquisition of a target, it's called maintaining your sight picture. So that weapon has no special optics on it, from what I can see, like one of those little red dot sights on the top of it. It's not. So he's using the iron sights that are built into the slide of a Glock, which on the back side is kind of a U or a V shape, kind of housing on the back that's on the top. And then you'll have a post in the front. Sometimes they're illuminated, sometimes they're not. And it'll have a little glowing dot. And you're supposed to create what's called a sight picture. Well, one of the problems with this is that every time a weapon misfires or you have to clear it, you have to reacquire your sight picture. And it makes people nervous. Particularly, I can only imagine, I've never had to shoot at moving targets like this, a human. If you're in a rush and you're trying to do this, it turns you into Barney Fife. You're fumbling with a weapon all the while, and you might not completely get it to clear. You can have what's referred to as a stovepipe, where as you're trying to cycle through the ejection, the cycling process gets so screwed up. First off, this is a 3D printed weapon, or at least the lower receiver is, and you've got a suppressor that has allegedly been 3D. There's all kinds of catastrophes that could happen here. But Dave, I got to tell you, watching the person in that image, I'm not saying it's him, but watching that person in that image, he was silky smooth. I mean, he truly was. When you see him try to clear that weapon over and over again, and then he walks by, he discharges that weapon one more time before he disappears off to the left out of frame, and that's what made it so chilling, because you could tell that this person, at least in a very broad sense, knew what they were doing. That tells me that they've practiced with that weapon. It doesn't mean that they're a marksman by any shape. It doesn't mean certainly that they're an expert. It just means that they understand. They understand what the capabilities or lack of capabilities of this thing are.
So he's able to lie in wait patiently for Brian Thompson. As Brian Thompson is coming into the hotel, the accused, Luigi Mangione, steps out, and I mentioned this a minute ago. It's the first time many of us have actually seen what really happens when someone is shot. Oftentimes it's so blurry, but we just don't usually have this. I mentioned at some point, I felt like we were taking part in a snuff film by watching that. And I mentioned to a friend of mine that there was some thought back in the day of the David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, that they were making snuff films then.
I've heard that before, yeah.
And that was my thought with this. A snuff film is a set-up murder to be filmed for people to get their jollies off. And watching Brian Thompson be murdered it just was too much. But I want you, Joe, to describe for us what we saw, because to me, we see people in movies and on TV, they get shot and they go falling into a building but if you actually watch what really takes place, it's different. And watching Brian Thompson's reactions to being shot, there is a very specific thing that he is doing physically with the first shot, second shot, and then he falls. And I'm wondering at what point, or is there a way that you can know what was happening to his body internally as this was going on in the very brief number of seconds that passed?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to kind of sort that. I think there is a graininess that comes along with this. I'm grateful that they have it. Don't get me wrong, but you're not. And even if it was HD quality, I think that some people think that when an individual is shot, you're going to have this kind of explosive event that takes place. I have worked cases, Dave, where I've had individuals that have been shot through clothing, and I had to search to find the entrance wound, because there's not necessarily going to be a copious amount of blood that you're going to see. The blood might be all contained within that element of the body, whether it's the thigh, the calf, or even the back. But particularly in the immediate, and so you get, and depending upon how the person rests, I'll give you, for example, if someone is shot, say in the back of their thigh, so posterior thigh, they're hit, and let's say the round doesn't exit, okay, and they fall down face forward. All right, so they're shot in the posterior thigh. That blood is not going to drain out of that hole or that defect like it would if they were face up, having been shot in the back. You see what I'm saying? And the gravity will literally, and not to mention, Dave, my money is on it. I don't have any proof of this. I don't think he died like instantaneously.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
We'll see. I'll couch my bets on that, but I'm just saying, I don't necessarily know that he died instantaneously. The only wounds that at the time of this taping that we know of, he shot in the leg and he shot in the back is essentially, and I've heard some people saying back and chest. Well, a brief anatomy lesson here. You have a posterior chest. So if you place your hands between your shoulder blades, you might not be aware of this, but in the medical context, that's your posterior chest. Some people say, that's my back. It is your back, but we don't, in anatomical terms, medical terms, they don't refer to that as your back. That's your posterior chest. Okay, so if he shot in the posterior chest and he goes down into a prone position, which means face down, I hate that term, but face down, and it didn't exit out of him, then, you're not going to have like maybe necessarily a copious amount of blood at that point. Now, once he's flipped over and they start CPR on him and EMS rolls out, you're going to see as they're doing chest compressions and all this stuff. But here's the thing, Dave. To this point, and I don't know that we will get one anytime soon, we don't have our eyes on an autopsy report. But what I do know is that he was purposed. He showed up. The assassin showed up. I'll use that term, with a weapon that was meant to be concealed, not just visibly, but more importantly from the report of the sound. And he certainly showed up with the right type of ammunition. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.